This episode of the Unbuild It podcast is brought to you by Huber Engineered Woods. When we talk about Huber Engineered Woods, you know, we say they make Advantech, we say they make zip system, you know, they have liquid flash and subfloor glue and tape. And I think that most of our listeners are fairly familiar with their product lines. They make really high quality stuff that makes our job easier. But I also wanted to let you know that they have a couple of new products on the market that they just announced at IBSX for 2021. They have Advantech X Factor, and they have a new vapor permeable tape. And I think that those things are very important because they go to show what Huber Engineered Woods is really about. They're innovating and they're problem solving before even builders like myself have asked for those things. That process of innovation has kept them at the top of the game, at the top of the pile, and that process of innovation has caused builders like myself who are focused on durability and energy efficiency and really doing things the right way the first time to believe in them as a company and to use their products. We've been using their original Advantech formula since the late 90s as a company, and we've been using this zip system since 2013. So I think that proves to you my belief in the company. I hope that you'll look into Huber Engineered Woods, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Let's talk construction management software and what makes a software good. First, I'd say the ability to tackle the tasks that I need it to do, but more importantly, the ability for my team to comprehend the software, my clients to comprehend the software, and everybody involved to actually want to use that software or that interface. BuildBook could be that software for you. BuildBook is simple to learn and use. It allows for constant communication between you, your team members, and your clients. It doesn't waste time with unneeded features, and you won't have to send your team across country to learn how to operate it efficiently. At the end of the day, BuildBook should reduce your stress and your team's stress as well. BuildBook is an all-in-one construction software for today's builders. Whether you're a one-person operation or a large building crew, BuildBook has plans to fit your budget. They don't have any of those nagging sales calls or tricky upsells or hidden fees. You can sign up for a 10-day free trial with BuildBook so that they can teach you and show you what the value is of their product. You should head over to buildbook.co to get started. Don't forget to mention that you heard it from us, the Unbuild It podcast. That's buildbook.co. Thank you, BuildBook, for your sponsorship.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unbuild It podcast. Your host today, Steve Bazek. I'm here with my good buddies, Peter Yost.
Yo.
And Jake Bruin.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in for one hell of a roller coaster ride for a couple reasons today. One, I'm your host. Two, I'm very cranky today. And three, and buckle up for this one, because we're talking about the NFRC label that comes on your windows. Yes, the NFRC label. I have to repeat that just to get that excitement at an all-time high.
I'm on the edge of my chair.
Well, you know what's funny, Peter, about that is you say that, and I know you are when it comes to the NFRC label. That's the ironic thing about that. For me, I'd be like, okay, I guess if I got to do this, it's better than sticking toothpicks under my fingernails.
Or going to the dentist.
So we'll talk about the label. But I know you probably rushed home and prepared yourself for this. But that's why we love you, brother. That's why we love you. So without further ado, I'm not even going to say what the NFRC stands for, Peter. I'm going to go right to you and say, what does it stand for? Why do we have it? And what is it?
Whoa. Okay. So
And I'll just rest the rest of the podcast.
You
I'm
go
going to get a
first,
cup of
Jake.
coffee.
What's
Jake,
NFRC
can you shut up,
stand
please?
for?
Jake, just please be quiet. Peter speaking. I'm the host here.
Peter-
There's no assistant host. There's
Peter,
no assistant host.
I can mute him if you want me to, Peter.
I can
It stands
mute him.
it stands for the National Fenestration Rating Council, NFRC.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'll start with a little bit of the backstory because, I think probably the development started in the late 1980s for getting the industry to agree to a single performance set of numbers so that we could compare one window to the next. And the interesting thing to me is it took a long time. I think it was about a 10-year development process to get the protocol down for testing the performance of windows. And it's because everybody has their own technologies and their own frames that they use. And they all were positioning so that their particular line of windows did optimally or best for their company. So getting everybody to agree, like, well, if we're going to test the whole window, what size window? Because it changes the proportion of the glass, the frame. And so getting the research scientists and the product manufacturers to all line up was a pretty mean feat. But they did it. And we now have a single label, the National Fenestration Rating Council label, that everybody uses, or just about everybody. And it's cited by the code.
And so you're saying that that initial process to start and to agree on what this label was for, some manufacturers might argue for something that shows their window more favorably than others. Like if you're an aluminum manufacturer, you might argue for some things that don't talk about heat transfer through that aluminum frame. Or if you make triple glaze windows, you might argue for things that would go better with triple glaze windows or things like that, just to clarify.
Yes.
The same as in any freaking industry association, while it is an industry association, and it's my understanding that the NFRC is a 501(c), like it's a nonprofit organization that's funded by all these manufacturers, they're going to argue and try to get ahead and use any rating council as a way to also advertise.
Yeah, and we probably ought to do a session with someone from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, since that's one of the 5 or 6 national labs that really focuses on windows and glazing. In particular, Charlie Church has been a research scientist there for a long time. Or get Steve Selkowitz, because he was there for the whole. I mean, he worked for LB&L for probably 30 or 40 years and recently retired. But boy, if we could get a couple of drinks into him, we could get real backstory.
Hey, I got a question for you guys.
Wait, did you unmute him? I didn't unmute him.
I got a question for you guys. It's really interesting that the 1980s we decided to develop a window standard. But here's a question for both of you. When was the first recorded use of a glass window?
Oh, that's
Ooh,
really
Are we
interesting.
guessing game?
No, I know the answer.
I'm going to say the 1300s.
I just looked it up. You'd be wrong.
He knows because he looked it up, not because he knew.
I know. Well, that's because I'm the host. I'm supposed to.
But isn't part of the story that the Greek or the Romans developed the first glass, and then the technology was lost, and then it reappeared like hundreds of years later? Isn't that part of the story?
Yeah, pretty much. The Romans developed it in roughly 100 AD.
Wow.
The use of glass. Then it became back in the Renaissance kind of Gothic Middle Ages. It became a more prominent use.
So then, if the Romans had it, in that era, what are we talking? Like Library of Alexandria type window?
Well, what I'm saying is glass has been around for 2,100 years, and 30 years ago we decided to set a standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is a good point. I agree. Now I
That's
can.
all.
Go
I'm
back
just
to being
playing
muted.
host. Listen, okay. So, Peter, continue, please. Onward and upward.
Well, I guess the thing to do is to move into the label, because that's the main way that we think of the NFRC, and that's standardized reporting. So when you look at an NFRC label, which is on just about every window we install in buildings, although you can find windows that aren't labeled, but they're usually pretty small mom and pop shops, or frankly, incredibly high performance windows coming from someplace else that have not yet, done all the research and testing that's needed to get the NFRC label, because it is I don't know if it's a North American label or just a US label. There's another good question. I don't know if the NFRC applies.
Well, if it helps, Peter, I have never seen one of these labels in Canada.
Huh. So they must
I
have.
haven't been to
their own
Canada
system.
since I was 10, but I have never seen one of these labels in Canada.
And I'm pretty sure you weren't installing Windows when you were 10, right? I mean, you worked with your dad, but.
So let's talk about the required information that goes on the sticker. Number one, it does have to have the NFRC label on it, like their little insignia, and it has to say National Fenestration Rating Council. Otherwise, it's not one of their stickers.
Exactly.
Number two, it has to have the window manufacturer. It has to have the window model, like say Anderson does 100, 200, 400 series. It has to have what kind of the style it is, as in if it's a casement or a double hung or a picture or an awning or a hopper or whatever. It has to have the glazing type. So it'll say double glaze, triple glaze, single, whatever. And then it has to have if it's got gas in it. So it'll say if it has argon in it. And then it has a unique number that I didn't know about until the last 2 or 3 years, that sticker is only good for that window. So that sticker isn't a mass-produced sticker. That sticker is literally made for that unit with that glazing in it. And that sticker isn't, as far as I understand, isn't replaceable. You can't just call the distributor and go, hey, I need another one of those stickers. Now, that unique number does let you go and find that unit in the NFRC's records. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the other interesting thing, is that there's a database so that you can look up, if you haven't bought the window yet, you can look up what the NFRC label is. And then the other thing is that there's a difference between a window and the IGU, or the insulated glazing unit, which is made by a IGU manufacturer, which is, different than the window manufacturer. And there's something called the International Glazing Database, IGDB. And that's just for agreed upon expression of the properties of the glazing unit, which is just the glass.
Which is just a more minutia version of what we're talking about, right? Like it's just like this happens before the window manufacturer buys the glazing unit and puts it in their window.
Yeah, but interesting, it's an international database. So, particularly for commercial buildings, there are a lot of things you can do with the numbers coming out of that database to better understand how the window performs, how the glazing performs. So we should probably, on that sticker, there's 4 boxes or windows, right?
Yep.
And 3 of them are always populated, and 1 of them is sometimes populated. So what's the upper left?
U factor.
The U factor.
What the heck is U factor?
Well, it's an expression of the conductivity through the window. And of course, so that's heat transfer, through the solid parts of the window. And you think, well, wait a minute, there's gas inside there. And there's a difference between how heat gets transmitted through the glass as opposed to the frame. But that's the whole beauty of the NFRC label, is that the protocol has a standard for how you calculate or measure the total heat transfer through that window to get the U factor.
So it's
because
important.
different windows have different frames, different size of frames compared to the glass. And that's what took such a long time to develop. So the U factor is essentially the inverse of the R value, right? So if we get a 0.25 U factor, we can say, oh, that whole window performs like an R4 window.
So it's important to note, we kind of glazed over it. That was not a pun, but I did say that, and now it does seem like I was trying for a pun. The sticker is for the entire unit. Frame, glazing, the weather stripping, everything. Everything that you got out of the package that you would carry thinking this is the window. It's not just the glass. So when you hear 0.3 or 0.27 U factor, the glass is worse and the frame is better. And the smaller the window, the lower the U factor might potentially be. Then the bigger it gets and you get a better frame or you get better glass. And so it is for that unit, but it's also proportional. You have to think about, well, if it's a 10 foot by 10 foot window that has a really small aluminum frame, that aluminum frame is not going to make that big a difference, but the glass is. But if it's a 12 inch by 12 inch window with a big beefy UPVC frame where the glass is, note card size, then the glass has less of an impact on the overall unit just because of the scale.
Hey, Steve, it's kind of like how you think about opaque walls, right? That someone will say, oh, that's an R19 wall because I've got an R19 bat in there, right? No, you don't have an R19 wall because there's the bat, there's the framing, right? So
yeah, it's like saying I have an R10 window because the center of glass is at R10, but the window really isn't R10.
There you go. It's the same
The
concept.
window might be 7.
Just a quick background. I'm just perusing the NFRC label.
Steve's doing
website.
live research, in other words.
I'm doing live research here because I'm hosting. That's what I do. I get to the bottom of things. What's interesting is in today's world, you would think websites now would have to be accountable for multiple countries looking at them, right? To say like, hey, NFRC label is an American label used for windows and door fenestration, blah, blah, blah. But they don't. There's no mention of, the best is you can guess that it's a set of metrics that are being used for windows that allow you to compare apples to apples across windows. So you can make windows in Canada, and I'm assuming you can get an NFRC label for them. But Canada doesn't require, it's not used. It's the NFRC label is for American comparison only, but it's not because the units are domestically produced.
Well, that's a great way of thinking of it, Steve, the apples to apples. And what's interesting too is, if you're trying to bring a window into the US, there's nothing that says that it has to have an NFRC label, except that in order to get one, you have to do your testing in an NFRC approved lab
facility. Yeah.
Right. And the other interesting thing is they had to agree at a temperature difference between the inside and the outside of the building to standardize the testing. And the delta T that the European Union uses is a different temperature difference than what we use here in the US. And so,
you know what we use here?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the delta T here is 75 degrees indoor, outdoor. And that's because we decided that we wanted to sort of get the performance of the window at sort of design conditions, worst case scenario. And the Europeans said, no, well, we don't want to know how the window performs total thermal from that. We want to do standard conditions.
Just for the record, I have what I call the SBRC, which is the Steve Basic Rating Council.
We have to take your.
It's kind of like Joe Math, right? There is the damn good window, the good window, the it's okay window, and the why bother window. So I have 4 classifications in mind.
And what falls under the why bother category? Single pane,
why
historically
bother?
accurate.
Yeah, it's like you put it in the window, you can rack it about 3 inches, and for some reason you could install it that way. And the sash doesn't even stay up, right? If you unhook it, the upper sash of the double hung just slides down on its own. I've seen those before. The ones where like you can put your hand up against and feel the wind actually blowing through the meeting rail or.
Well, we'll talk
the
about
edge.
that too, because that's one of the things that's on.
But
this.
yeah, I mean, I didn't want to. I just wanted to let you guys inform you guys that there's multiple rating councils out there.
Okay, so
And
Peter said that the U factor is about heat loss and that it's the inverse of the R value. So for simple math, I brought up 2 window stickers that I took pictures of on our jobs. One of them's from about 2010, maybe 2011, and then one of them is on a house that Steve and I have going right now. So if I take 1 divided by 0.27, the window that we installed at those people's house was a R3.7, and that's the whole unit, not just the glazing. And that's the old-timey, we could call it old-timey, 10-year-old window that we installed. And that's a fairly standard number for an American-made double glazed
pane sealed glazing unit. Yep.
I think that unit
yeah,
was
they've gotten a
from
little better. They
Anderson.
used to be at like point. I remember when I first started out, they were at like 0.3335. Now it's 0.3028, something like that. What's interesting is on the NFRC website under U factor, they say the range is limited to 0.2 to 1.2. And what's interesting, though, is we have a bunch of domestic producers that are selling 0.16.
Yep.
So the NFRC isn't even got their information up to date
That's really interesting.
on their website.
Yeah.
So what was the U factor for the house you and Steve are working on?
9.34 for the center of glass number, which you're not going to get on the NFRC label, but it is a 6.2 for the U factor.
Well, wait a minute. It would have to be the U factor.
R6.2 is the
R6.2.
R value. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like a 0.16.
What's interesting,
Yeah.
Peter,
U
is
factor.
Yep.
on those houses, because they're really good examples, like the Swafford house or the Hilltop house that Jake and I are working on. You could stand in one room. We have a 6 foot by 10 foot window that has a U value of probably like 0.10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have another window adjacent that has an operable piece that's like a 3 by 5 that's 0.15. And then we have a smaller window that's like 21 inches by 30 inches, and that's like 0.17. And all 3 of those numbers are guided by 2 main factors, operable or not, and size of frame, because the frame is the worst part. The more glass you put in on that big window, it looks that much better because the glass to frame ratio is that much higher.
But that's important because then you're talking about the actual performance of the window unit rather than just center of glass. So that's the upper left-hand corner. The upper right-hand corner is the solar heat gain coefficient.
Yep.
Which is SHGC.
Can we and tell me if you feel like I'm oversimplifying this. If the U factor is heat loss, the SHGC is heat gain from the outside, right?
That's a good way of thinking of it. So it's between 0 and 1, and if you have a solar heat gain coefficient of 0.6, it means that 60% of the infrared energy is making its way through that glass, right? So that's a pretty high solar heat gain coefficient.
So the lower the
we
number,
at
the better.
We at the SBRC, we like to think of the U value and the solar heat gain as simple thermal direction.
Somebody's Googling the entire time we're talking, by the way.
I'm not Googling the entire time. I came up with that one on my own. Thank you very much.
So the lower the number, the better. If it's a 0 to 1 and I have a 1, that means it's letting everything through. And if I have a 0, it's letting nothing through.
Well, if you're in a hot, humid climate, in a hot climate, you want to knock that number down because you want to reject that heat. And if you're in a cold climate, you say, wait a minute, I want that solar gain in the winter. The tricky thing is, but don't I want to restrict solar gain in the winter in a cold climate? And
the problem is in climates like Boston or Minneapolis, our August is Miami's August.
So is this, so should we be thinking about the SHGC number also while thinking about where the sun is in the sky, the trees that have leaves and our overhangs? So that during the months that we don't want the solar heat gain number to hurt us, to be a detriment, we have shading, we have overhangs that are appropriate to stop the sun from hitting the glass, and in the winter our overhangs are just short enough that it lets as much of it in as possible?
Well, we should.
Hey, here's a question for you, Peter. And
he's not going to answer my question.
Oh, did you have one?
It was a perfect setup for the architect.
It was. He wasn't listening. He was Googling.
I wasn't Googling. I was thinking about my question. And it was a very intelligent one.
Okay, write it down and listen to my question again then. Shouldn't we be thinking about that solar heat gain coefficient in regards to seasonal shading? Like, doesn't that resolve that question for us?
It does, but that's what led me to my question for Peter.
Okay.
Does the angle of this does play in, because my answer to you is yes, all those things apply. But my question to Peter is, should they apply because of what I'm about to ask? Is there an intensity that increases or decreases with angle of incidence?
Yes, it's really important. And that was what yet another thing that they had to get agreement on in the NFRC process.
Right. So the answer then, Jake, is, now that I've had Peter's professional help, that it becomes even more true, because yes, in the summertime in the Boston area in July, the sun is at 77 degrees to the horizon, right? Or the azimuth, right? In the middle of December, Christmas time, it's at about 13 degrees, but it's much colder. But the angle of incidence is much, it's more perpendicular.
Yeah.
Obviously in winter, it's more shedding in the summer. So while the sun is more intense, it has the ability to deflect more in the summertime than it does. But here's the really interesting part of getting into that we could do a podcast on this specifically, just call it solar shading. But every architect I know and have seen, when they talk about solar, they always do that stupid diagram of, especially if you're doing it in Boston, 77 degrees in June 21st and 13 degrees December 21st. Well, June 21st is not the hottest day of the year, and December 21st is not the coldest day of the year. Very rarely ever, because of thermal lag. So you're developing a glazing system and heating system using the sunlight on the wrong results or wrong metrics to be defining it. But anyways, like I said, we could do that more. But so yes, the short answer to your question is yes, Jake, I think all of those things are concerning, but because of what Peter said and what I thought to be true, summertime is a little bit more shedding than wintertime.
Yeah.
So
angle of incidence equals angle of refraction. And if it's a high angle of incidence, then that means it's more likely to bounce out of the picture. In other words.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that when we're going to talk later about window coverings, but when we were testing different window coverings and their impact on thermal performance, we were very careful to have the angle of incidence be perpendicular to the surface of the glazing. When
does that happen?
Exactly. Even though
skylights,
but it's a difference between standardizing and whether you're, assessing its performance over an annual cycle. But Steve, So how many buildings, how many passive houses have you done where you've been able to appropriately shade the windows with just a fixed exterior shading device given?
Yeah, they don't, because of the date issue that I just brought up.
Yeah.
It's a dumb here you go. It's a dumb idea. How about that? To use June 21st. And the minute, and Peter, you've seen it because we've done it. When we get up and give talks and we talk about solar shading, it's an easy one to trick the audience. Hey, what date do I use for summer? Everybody, June 21st. Yeah, okay. That's a dumb idea.
But even
just because the sun is at its highest.
But even if I correct for that, Steve, for the thermal lag, I still, if I just pick one moment in time, and you
still have 364 other days to solve for.
And a lot of passive homes have overheated in the shoulder seasons when, the angle of incidence is different than the appropriate angle overhang, and that solar gain makes the buildings, really, you end up cooling when you shouldn't be doing anything because there's too much solar gain through the window, given the performance of the overall building.
And Jake brought up a great point. Skylights, that's what makes skylights even worse than the water management problem, is they almost become a perpendicular angle of incidence, right? It can't be any worse of a condition than to put a skylight in, because it's going to almost align perfectly with the summer sun to just cook that room.
Yeah, and the most effective way of controlling solar heat gain is to block it from the outside, because once you have to rely upon coatings inside the glazing, you've already lost a big part of the battle. So, Steve, another question for you about tuning glass. How many times do you use different solar heat gain on different sides of the building?
I was waiting for you to ask this, because I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a metaphor or story. This is personal. I've as I get older, and because I'm really cranky today, allows me to be, heighten this effect a little bit. But on my first, say, one or two passive house projects, we were probably concerned about it, right? And that's because I would say I didn't know any better. Now, if you asking me that question, I say it's like going apple picking and trying to get the second highest apple from the tree, right? It's like if I have to climb through the tree and go and put my 150-pound frame out on a 3-inch limb and then reach for the second highest apple instead of just grabbing the one that I could have reached from the ground, I'm probably missing something.
On my list of metaphors I'd pay to watch. That one comes up pretty
But
high.
it's like, so Dan Roy's house, only because I know the numbers so well. 2,600 square feet. We had a heating load of 4,500, right? And at that point, what does glazing tuning do for us? Change that number by 100 or 2. We're at half the size of the smallest mini split at the time.
But for the Dan Roy has an example, since that faced solar south, what percentage of your total glass was on that wall? It was probably more than 50%, right?
No, the south wall, well, more than 50% of the
total glazing.
Maybe not the overall glass, but like 35% of the south facing wall was glass.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So what you're saying is I tuned the properties of all the windows the same, but I had such a high proportion on the south side that the contribution from the other glazing having different properties there wouldn't have mattered that much.
Yeah, that it doesn't matter. If I solve for the problem on the south facing wall, the other stuff is a blip on the radar screen.
And from a builder's perspective, do I really have one more thing that I have to worry about?
Well,
I really have to add
honestly,
that one more thing in that I might put a window in the wrong spot or something.
You bring up a good point. And I mean, some of the good things that I've moved to is labeling every window individually. So I don't have A type and B type windows on my project anymore. I have window 1-1, 1-2, 2-1.
Yep.
So it can only be that window.
Which is
and
fantastic.
while-
Back up and say that again to every architect that listens. No window shares a number with the one somewhere else in the house. They are only
Right.
that number.
There's not 15 A windows in my house. There is 1-1, 2-1, 3-1. They might all be A windows, but that 1-1 can only go in the 1-1 hole. It can't go anywhere else, or it shouldn't go anywhere else. It's made for that one hole. But I forget where I was going with this. You made me repeat.
That's okay.
It
That was a
turned me
good
off track.
point, and it was worth repeating
That
if
was-
it made you
that was
lose
a
your
good
train of thought.
But I mean, part of me wants to say, okay, you're a builder. You're supposed to be smart. You can friggin' sort out 15 windows, can't you? But I understand in the heat of the moment that does become challenging, because I've been on jobs where it's like, Steve, we're short a tempered window on here. And I'm like, no, they were all here. And then we're going around and it's like, oh yeah, this window here in the hallway, this one should be over in the bathroom. Right? Because it has the tempered label that they just didn't overlook it. A lot of times it's not the person that is the most qualified sorting the windows in the garage and delivering them to their location.
Yeah. And Steve,
So-
I can't let this passive house thing go, which is that the specific impact of tuning or not tuning to aspect because of the calculations in
Right.
the PHPP requirements, right? So
Yes.
at least you have quantitative feedback that, hey, I've got a lot of levers I can pull to improve the performance of the building, and there are more important ones to pull than tuning the glazing to aspect, right?
Yes. So what we actually did there, though, because we're going to use this one as an example, we picked the largest window system in the house and we did exterior solar shading on it.
Right, exactly.
So,
Bingo.
So now, and this is what I'm saying by, if you have to climb all the way through the tree to grab the apple, you should have just stayed on the ground and said, you know what? What's the biggest problem here? Maybe it's that 11-foot wide by 9-foot tall window system.
Right.
Well,
right.
instead of trying to solve for all the windows around the house, let's leverage our costs.
Yeah.
And we'll put a $2,000 shading device out there. And oh, by the way, it works for performance, but now the clients can sit in that room and not cook because
Right.
they're not getting sun baking on them. So we changed it to a comfort solution. And the value system there is such that people say, well, how do I sell energy efficiency? And I'm the first one to stand up and say, never sell energy efficiency because nobody wants to friggin' buy it. So don't try and sell it. But that homeowner knows what it means to sit on a couch in front of a sun when it's 90 degrees outside and have the back of their neck bake or not bake.
They know what comfort
And they
is.
understand that value.
Which is actually an interesting point when we talk about comfort, because all these things do equate to comfort in one way or another, right? If your window's losing a lot of heat or letting a lot of heat in, or let's move on to the third box on that label, the VT
Cool.
number.
Well, the minute we come in, and if we use the SBRC label and we talk about thermal direction, if I'm standing in front of the window on a cold day, then I've become the heat source to the window. If it's colder. In the I become the heat sink to the window.
Yeah, it's like
Right.
it's like reclaiming perimeter footage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be either one of those because of comfort, like you said, Jake. So, and so that's how we do it, Peter. I think Passive House was really good in that it brought a whole bunch of stuff to our attention. But because it's a nine page or however many page, I don't know, because I'm an anarchist about getting a Passive House consultant or whatever label attached. I won't sit through that. But my point is, when you have a 9 or 10 page spreadsheet and we're applying a number to the spacer that's used in this specific window, in some cases, we might be missing the point of what we're doing, right? That we're really trying to build a very energy efficient house at a really good price point with the best way we can do it. And I get all those numbers matter. And for the computer analysts of the world that want to model everything. But for me, I think there's a point where if I have to go beyond the first branch, maybe I should rethink what I'm doing about apple picking here.
I mean, you and I feel the same way about rating programs, but they are and were really, really helpful in helping us better understand performance.
Yep.
No doubt. Yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
So that third one in the lower left corner, Jake.
Visible transmittance, which is one that I think of in the way of comfort that a lot of people would just look at and go, well, that's how much light it lets in. But
speaking of visual transmittance,
the more it blocks out,
Zoom
the worse it is.
Zoom should have a feature of visual transmittance. Like, I should be able to cloud you guys to a certain degree that makes me happier.
Is that like squinting at an impressionist painting or something? Is that what you're doing?
Well, I should have this like dial that Jake slowly becomes like an opaque blob behind a gray screen.
Is that better? If I just turned my camera off, is that better? So
no.
That VT number, when I was thinking about this, I went to the what is it? Efficient. Is it efficientwindows.org?
Efficientwindows.org. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So efficientwindows.org.
No, you got a lot of time
because
on your
they
hands.
have. Well, they
like
kind
the
of
Phone Book Readers Association of America.
For a long time, they've kind of been involved with NFRC, and they've kind of been partners in this, like, we're pushing to make things better initiative thing, or as long as I've been aware of efficientwindows.org. And they have a like real simple like, tell us where you live, which side of the house,
Sure.
like we're just talking about, how big it's going to be, what the shading is, and we'll tell you what windows you can buy. And it starts with the best window, and the VT numbers for their best windows are 0.4. So when we're talking about websites needing to be updated, I'm pretty sure that let's look, the windows that we just put in, Steve, the VT number is 0.74, which means they're letting 74% of that light, the available light, through the assembly, as opposed to efficientwindows.org saying the best that you're going to get from a U.S. manufacturer is 0.4.
But that...
Hey, just, Peter, before we just go on any further, I'm just going to put a street metaphor to visual transmittance for everybody. Think of it as how much of a pair of sunglasses do you want your window to be? Right?
That's good.
Meaning they can be the clear birth control glasses that Jake is wearing now, that is 100% clear glass, all the way down to a near black sunglass, right? Where you can barely see out of it. That's what we're talking about here, is that effect that the coatings and the performance attributes of glazing place on a window with respect to the ability to see out them clearly.
Yeah, I think that's a decent metaphor. I was going to say, Jake, when you have 0.7 or so in a high performance window, so you have a window that has a really good U factor, but also has a really good visual transmittance. But I'll bet you it's a triple pane.
Yep.
Yeah. So, if you're a double pane window, the only way to get a really good U factor is with low E coatings. And it's the low E coatings which help you with solar heat gain, but also really knock down the visual transmittance.
Yep.
So the starting point always is, well, what is the visual transmittance of a single piece of clear glass, no low E coatings? And that's in the 0.85 range. So that means just putting up a single piece of glass, about 15% of the visible light is blocked. Now, you could say, really? It doesn't look any different to me. Well, it's because your eye has a really difficult time unless you have... So if you have a single pane of glass and right next to it is no glass, you might see the difference because that's 15%. But now let's go to a triple pane that has 0.7 as the VT, at what point do you drop that you'll start to say, I can see that that's letting through less visible light? And it's not until you get down to around 0.5 or 0.55.
Yeah, but that's a relative measurement, meaning that, and this is one of the other reasons of why not to mix and match windows, is because of the VT number.
That's exactly where I was headed.
Right? That if we alter the U values and SHGC numbers, then we could potentially have two windows in a bedroom that when I look out them, they look different because I've altered the performance with films and such. So I would rather opt for picking the optimal window performance and then just buying all 38 windows with it. Because I've been in houses where we've been at like 0.48 or 5.1. And if I told you that number, I've had people say, oh my God, that's like wearing sunglasses.
Yeah.
But if it's the only glass you're looking out from the house, it's all relative and it doesn't look that much different. Your mind will fake it.
Yeah,
but like you said, Peter, if I put a 0.5 next to a 0.71, you'd sit there and go, wow, is that glass dirty?
So
you have to see them both at the same time in order to really see the difference.
One of my pickiest clients ever, and I say that, and it may have just been that I was a poor business owner at the time, and I let people bully me and push me around and try to tell me how to run my business.
I was going to say, you shouldn't talk about your wife on the podcast.
I know this is a safe space. I asked her the other day if she had ever listened to the podcast, ever watched anything I did for Build Show Network, or ever read anything that I've written for one of the magazines. And she went, no. Should I? And I was like, nah, not really. I mean, it remains a safe space if I know that I'm in the free and clear. I had a client ask for a window in a dining room. We were remodeling a whole house, and they asked for a window in the dining room that was bigger than what we could get the window manufacturer that we're using to send us. And this is like 2008. So this was not too far into me owning the business. And so I called our commercial storefront company here in town and said, I need this. Can you guys do it? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, I will build a wood frame. And I felt like I did a really good job constructing a frame. And then they brought it out and set the window for us. And as soon as we got done putting the stops in, the homeowner showed up and said, well, how come that one looks all green?
Oh, no.
And I went, oh, crap. Like, I looked at it and the window that we had bought from, I think it was Marvin, next to it, and they were completely different colors. And one of them looked like they were super green and one of them didn't. And I was like, oh. And so the green, but then it was darker too. So that made it worse.
So there's two things there. One is, at what point is the visual transmittance low enough that even without comparison, you're going to say that's too dark?
Yeah.
And the generally agreed upon, based upon Lawrence Berkeley National Lab research, is you should not go below 0.41 visual transmittance. That is just too little visual transmittance. But then the other thing is that visual transmittance is averaged over all of the color bands. So you can, as you said, Jake, you can have two windows that are both 0.65 VT, but because of the low E coatings, which filter different color bands, you can get, hey, the average is the same, but that one's letting through more red and this one's letting through more green.
Or scale of frame, or glazing bars, or divided lights, because we're talking about the whole unit. Yeah. Scale of window, if they were dramatically different, might make a difference. Now, I doubt you'd be able to see it, but it is there.
Yeah, so, that's another thing. I had a client once, and I wrote an article for Building Science Corporation about this back for the Building America program, called Singing the Blues in the Key of Low E. It's one of my favorite titles ever. And it was all about a client who said, you can't put low E windows in my building. They're too blue. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? And Steve, that was when we were working with Cardinal Glass as a Building America partner. And they actually sent me a chart of how incredibly different windows with similar VTs were color rendering. And the solution for that client was she had to actually go and see the actual window unit so that she could say, yeah, that one's okay. The color effect of the low E coatings is not going to bother me. She actually had seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and blue tinted windows, particularly in winter, were a big problem. So that the fact
there's like first world problems in the world,
exactly what
and
I
then
was
there's
thinking.
like there's living on Mars problems. That's kind of like living on Jupiter problems.
Those are problems that people have once they no longer have to worry about where their clean water is coming from.
and until they're your client, Steve, and then you're going to have to.
Exactly. Then you have to cater to it. Also,
Well,
I've
yes,
never
yeah.
heard the abbreviation SAD for seasonal affective disorder, and I don't
Yeah.
know why it's making me laugh so hard.
Huh. That's funny.
Yeah, it's
Sadly funny. Hey, the other thing
That's
is that
crazy.
Sadly funny.
actually-
I heard that.
there's something called Delta Color C, and it's a way that you can take the data from the the International Glazing Database and do a calculation on color rendering. Because if you don't have that chart to compare to, how do you actually get a number? And we never do this on residential projects, but there are commercial building projects where they do calculate what's called the Delta Color C, and it's a mathematical expression of different color band contributions to low E coatings. So we've everybody who's listening now has suffered through 3 of the windows or the boxes in the NFRC label.
I'm
You better
still
get
excited.
to the last one pretty quick.
Air
So
leakage.
the lower right is AL or air leakage, and it's the one that you don't have to report. It's optional. So I don't know if, I'm pretty sure that you have to test for it, but you don't have to report until the influence of the 2015 code, right?
okay. Is it appropriate to wake the audience now?
Give it a minute. Let's see if we can get through the rest of this so we don't have to be scrutinized by talking about air leakage.
Do you have something to say about air tightness of windows, Steve?
No.
No.
And
They just should be good ones.
that number is a 0.3 or less number, right?
Right, 0.3 cubic feet per minute per square foot of window. And the new 2015 code says you have to show that that's the performance of your windows or better. And so if you have a window label without it, the code inspector can say, hey, I need that number. You're going to have to get it from the manufacturer, which of course is a real pain in the butt. So now we are getting more companies reporting the AL number because the code is requiring it with the 2015 energy code.
The SBRC label suggests that if you do a positive blower door and a negative blower door, then a great window is one that has roughly the same number.
So you do understand that the SBRC is the Steve Basic Rating Council. And I just have this picture in my head that council is Steve sitting in a room by himself talking
Screaming.
to the other members of the council.
Screaming and slamming a gavel and saying "You're out of order" back and forth to himself. Yes.
Who's the dead comedian? Farley? What's his name?
Chris
Yeah.
Farley.
Chris Farley? Yeah, I could see him being that guy.
He could be on your council.
Like,
yeah, he definitely could.
screaming and yelling, slamming a gavel.
The Hilltop House, just so we're covering this whole sticker, is 0.03 for the one that I have a picture of. And the reason that is so low is that's a fixed unit.
So that's 10 times tighter than the requirement of 3 CFM per square foot, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and this is one of the big, frankly, discussions when they were doing the NFRC label was you better make air leakage optional because all of us who make a lot of double hung windows, they're almost impossible to make even
Much better.
reasonably airtight.
So I got an anecdotal story for this one, Peter.
Steve, you do understand the
Angie.
anecdotal story is repetitive. It's either an anecdote or it's a story.
Technically,
this is why
it's
I
both.
hate you guys.
Technically,
No, this is why I hate you guys. I hate both of you guys. Anecdotally, the story goes, I hate both of you. Okay? But when I first started working with Jerry at Artistic Homes, one of the things that I learned from him was over half of the windows in his houses were fixed. Right? They weren't fixed because he was driving an energy efficient
I remember
boat.
this. Yeah.
They were fixed because he was building for so many years, he would get callbacks on dirt and sand getting blown in through double hung windows. So he made it a personal choice for his building company to move to casements and fixed to eliminate that problem.
Yeah, that's the quintessential builder. I'm going to reduce my risk and exposure wherever I can, and hopefully I'm going to do it in a way where the client doesn't know that it happened.
And in our house, I bet you 50% of the windows in that house we never open, even though they're all double hungs.
Yep.
So
I go round and round with clients. Round and round with clients. I want to build a high performance home, passive home. Okay. Well, let's make this fixed. Let's make this. Oh, no, you don't understand. We're going to open the windows. They say, no, you don't understand. You're going to come to realize that the environment you're living in is better than anything you're going to experience outside. And you're never going to open the windows. Well, we don't think so. So let's just make that operable so we have the option to open.
And frankly, dust and pollen, there are periods of time when you like to have your windows open, but when it's pollen season, that it's just like dust. It's in the air and it's getting everywhere.
Yep.
It's one of those things. And I know, Peter, we did those houses with our buddy, who's our buddy in Ohio? Older guy.
Oh, Jim LaRue?
Jim LaRue.
Yeah.
Remember we did that house that those nuns moved in.
Yeah. Yep.
This is the beginning of my favorite joke, by the way.
And I was not in a parsonage.
We built a house in
nuns
Ohio with the nuns.
2 nuns in Ohio in a high performance house. Where are we going with this one, right?
Right.
But no, Jake, I think there were like 6 nuns. 2 of them had really bad asthma that pretty much went away when they moved into this house.
So that when we talk about air leakage in this regard, it's the exact same conversation that we have with air leakage when we talk about control layers of the house, right? Like that's what I'm getting here is it's comfort, it's health, it's energy efficiency, it's about control. And if you have leaky windows, then you don't have control over what's going on.
Yeah, the window, I mean, I'm the host here, so we're about due to wrap this up. So I'm gonna leave you with this thought. The window is nothing more than a replacement section for the wall.
Yep.
And everything that we strive for control in our wall system, we need to strive for in our window system. And here's the rub. The window is always worse than the wall in almost every attribute. And so if you're in Texas or Louisiana and you say, well, do I really need that good of a window down here? It is always the worst part of the wall. Always.
And Steve, as a setup for our next window on Build It podcast, what's the very first thing that anybody does after they move into a new home? They start to change the performance of the windows by buying
shades and window.
All your best efforts right out the
blinds.
frickin' window. So we're going to talk about window coverings because I get even further. I'm almost falling out of my chair. I'm so excited about talking about window coverings.
I know that this is like I don't know. Just yeah, I get it. The windows are like at the forefront of Peter's like topics to talk about.
It's just like you can see right through me, Steve, just like a window.
I'm gonna glaze.
I wondered
over
when
that
we were
thought.
going to get one of those from you.
I'm gonna glaze over that thought, although Jake already used that one, so I'm gonna have to temper what I use.
But just one more quick wrap up, Steve. Efficientwindows.org, awesome website, a great resource for understanding technologies and also for selecting windows.
And
Yeah,
I hate
go
the
check it
fact
out.
that I'm going to say it like this, but I was entertained playing with it and seeing what it gave me for the choices, and I went to different climate zones.
I just hope nobody starts the podcast with that sentence, because it'll be bad.
That's like reading the last page of a book first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like but that just changes the whole story of the book. If that's the last sentence you read. Anyways, all right. As the host, that's it. That's everything about the NFRC label. I'm going to turn this over to our good friend Jake. He's going to tell us everything we should be doing.
We want to say thank you for listening to the Unbuild It podcast today and listening to the three of us blather on about window stickers. You would have thought that this would have been about political stickers of some sort for your car. There's a good John Prine song that flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore that I recommend you go listen to since we're talking about window stickers. We want you to leave a 5-star review on iTunes if you like what you hear. That's the way we know that we're headed down the right path. We want you to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen. It can be Spotify or Stitcher or iTunes, wherever you subscribe or wherever you listen, please subscribe. And if you have any questions at the unbuilditpodcast.com. I always do that. Sorry. I have to do that again. Questions at unbuilditpodcast.com. I always do that. I don't know why. But we really do thank you for listening, and we thank our sponsors for their support. Without you guys and without the sponsors, we don't have a podcast. Peter, say goodbye.
I want to personally thank both of you for enlightening me today.
Okay.
Always a
You
pleasure.
heard it. We're going to use that as our new intro. Thank you guys for enlightening me today from Steve every episode from here on out. Thank you, gentlemen.
See you guys.